Our city's businesses have gone through a lot with the economic shutdown due to the COVID-19 pandemic. To talk about its impact on Lethbridge and to share initiatives that are helping our city's small businesses is Trevor Lewington, CEO of Economic Development at Lethbridge. Trevor, thanks so much for joining us on Skype today.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you, even if it virtually.
Absolutely, always a pleasure. Okay, so every city in Canada has been impacted by the pandemic. How is Lethbridge doing economically compared to other cities across Alberta?
Yeah, Lethbridge has a relatively diverse economy. Our foundation in agriculture has helped us weather past storms, and so I don't want to minimize the impact. It is significant, both in terms of job loss and potential impact to the business community. But Lethbridge has fared much better than the rest of the province so far, and we expect that to continue.
Well, that's good news at least. What are the forecasted impacts of coronavirus on the economy?
Yeah, in the Lethbridge Medicine Hat employment region, we've seen a loss of about 15,000 jobs as an example. At the peak of the pandemic,
Wow.
we've since recovered about 4,000 of those. But Lethbridge Medicine Hat still has the lowest unemployment in the province. So it's a good news, bad news story. I don't want to minimize the story for those 15,000 people that were impacted, but it's proportionally far better than the rest of the province. Alberta as a whole, the forecast is that the economy will shrink by probably upwards of 11%, which is the single largest contraction basically since the Second World War. And the Lethbridge number is expected to be somewhere between 5 and 8%. So still significant. That's very painful, but again, relatively better performing than the rest of Alberta.
So, where are we seeing growth and where are we seeing losses then?
Yeah, well, as you might expect, sectors like accommodation, the hotels, restaurants that were probably most significantly impacted by the closures and public health measures have taken the brunt of employment and business loss. But surprisingly to us, even sectors like manufacturing have struggled. We've seen significant slowdown in agri-food processing, as an example, because restaurants are closed, those products are not required. We've seen that back up through the value chain. So it has impacted broad sectors of the economy.
Wow. And what's being done to support economic recovery efforts?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think all three levels of government have done a great job of putting many programs out there. That can sometimes be a challenge when businesses aren't quite sure how to navigate all of the different programs and supports. But whether it's income supports and business loans at the federal level, returning to business strategies and grants from the province, and even locally, the city's looking very heavily at stimulus projects and capital investments that will help get people back to work. So the good news is, I think all three levels of government are actively looking at economic recovery. They're trying to coordinate their efforts. The challenge, of course, is if you're a business that's struggling, that help can't come fast enough.
hmm So, it's nice to see that the government's offering that aid, but has that financial aid that's been offered by federal and provincial governments, has it been enough for those small businesses to stay afloat?
Yeah, we have certainly seen business closures and business failures in our community. We're certainly not exempt, just like every other community across the country and around the world, arguably. That's the sad part is when these business owners invest their blood, sweat, and tears and many years of their lives into building up these businesses and circumstances beyond their control take them away. What we've heard is that business owners appreciate the cash that's been injected into markets. The governments have not predominantly it's been grants as opposed to loans. So that puts money back in people's hands to make an impact. The challenge has been some of the commercial rent supports haven't been as well received by landlords, and so many businesses aren't seeing those savings passed on to them. So certainly there have been some programs that have been more successful than others.
hmm Now, do you think the mask bylaw will affect businesses in Lethbridge?
Yeah, businesses I think have embraced the mask bylaw. They recognize that it's again not something that they have control, and for the most part, I think customers are, recognizing that they're not the mask police. It's not something that they've imposed. It is, of course, challenging that it adds extra complexity in terms of controlling the number of people coming in and out of your store, monitoring interactions, and just making sure your folks, whether it's your staff or your customers, are protected. But it definitely adds a new challenge and another complexity to just trying to do business.
Yeah, that's true. And it seems that most people are pretty compliant with the bylaw. I'm not seeing too much opposition out in public, that is. We're seeing a different thing online, of course, but yeah.
Well, yeah, the keyboard warriors behind social media are always much more brave behind in the peace
Right.
and security of their own home. But certainly, when I've been out and about, there are definitely people that are complying with the mask bylaw. I've not seen any data from the city that would suggest it's a significant compliance outage. There are always going to be people that have exemptions that are legitimate that we have to recognize. It's important not to judge people not wearing masks, of course. There are some reasons not to wear them, but it's
100%.
also
Yeah.
but it's also something that's been recommended from a public health perspective. And I think the vast majority of people in Lethbridge are just taking it as one more step to protect their neighbors and protect their families.
We were talking earlier about the loans and the grants, and it's great to see that a lot of these businesses can take advantage of some of the provincial and federal grants. I know in the beginning it was more of a loan, and I think some businesses shied away from accepting that because they were afraid that if if their business closed, they would still have to owe back I think it was $40,000 back in the springtime. Have you seen much of that in terms of people not wanting to take advantage of it just out of fear?
Well, one of the things we've been advocating with government is to stay away from loan programs. So we've learned lessons from natural disasters like Fort McMurray and High River. And in those cases, governments relied very heavily on loans to get businesses back to work. The challenge was that when those loans became due, often businesses hadn't recovered sufficiently to be able to make those payments. So it actually just deferred the problem 6 months down the road. Most programs that have been rolled out, both provincially and federally, have been grants, so they're non-repayable. It gets cash back into the economy. Business owners can, pay their people. They can get people back to work. They can spend on inventory, and that's really what the stimulus is meant to do: is get the economy moving again, get liquidity back into people's hands to have an impact.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, assuming that this pandemic clears up and things ever get back to normal over the next few months, hopefully, fingers crossed, what are you hearing from locals as to how long it will take to get business volumes back to normal?
I think that's the magic question. No one really knows when the end of this pandemic will be. And there's obviously a wide range of forecasts. Some people have said it will be years, not months. And I think that's the uncertainty that's causing the business community the most anxiety. Certainly, I think all of us can plan for a few months or perhaps even a part of a year. But talking out into 2021 and 2022, if some of these restrictions come and go with multiple waves of the virus, there could be some significant impact. So I think obviously the sooner we can all get back to whatever the new normal is, I hate using that overused phrase, but as soon as we can get there,
Yeah.
that's where people will be able to sort of return to their spending levels and their activity levels and move on. But there's no doubt there's going to be disruptions, and we could see other challenges in the future if we have to pull back on some of the recovery and some of the reopening.
Yeah, well, let's hope that it's soon for sure. Now, how important is it right now for residents to buy local whenever possible?
Yeah, I think it's a really important point that people spend money in the local economy. There's been a number of studies over the years, and for every $1 you spend locally, it has an economic impact of $7. So sometimes people will think, well, I'm only going to Calgary to spend a few $100, but that actually turns into a few $1,000s of economic impact you're transferring to another community. The other aspect is that, to remember that sometimes a locally owned franchise, even though it's a nationally bannered business, that's still a local business with a local owner hiring local people. So when we talk about spending your money locally, we mean keeping it inside of our community, inside of our local economy.
Right. It's really important to remember that too. I think sometimes we kind of lose sight of that, especially as you kind of illustrated how far reaching that is. It's a good one
That
to
has a
remember.
big impact.
For sure. Recently, the Lethbridge Region Economic Recovery Task Force opened a physical location, or a one-stop
Mhm.
shop, right? Where business owners can meet with advisors to gain strategies on how they can function successfully in this new COVID environment. So tell us about this.
Yeah, so we're very fortunate to have a number of professionals that have volunteered and come forward. So we have a number of lawyers, accountants, insolvency trustees, human resources consultants, you name it, we've got expertise available. And all of these professionals have come forward to support the business community. They're volunteering their time to provide initial consultations. The university also stepped forward. They've donated the use of the Penny Building downtown. They've made space available to us to allow us to host these sessions. So on Mondays and Thursdays, business owners can come down to the Penny Building, they can book an appointment, and depending on what kind of advice or expertise they need, we'll connect them with a local expert that can get them started and get them pointed in the right direction. So whether it's financial or legal, the idea is to just get people pointed in the right direction and have them know what next steps they should take.
Yeah, that's a fantastic idea. And that just began this week, right?
We opened on Monday and saw our first clients on Monday. And again, today we had our volunteers down there. So I'm incredibly grateful to all of those amazing professionals who stepped forward and to the university for the use of that space.
Yeah, and you were saying that the advisors are volunteers.
That's correct. So, I mean, these are all very busy people that would normally, be managing their own business portfolios and billing for hours and things like that. And they recognize the importance of helping the business community. That's not to say that it's unlimited free advice. Ultimately, if you decide that there's a course you need to take, you'll have to pursue that with those folks and others in the community. But again, the initial consultation, the initial advice to get people started, we're taking care of that because it's how we think will accelerate the recovery.
That's amazing that they're willing to give of their time and expertise to help other business owners. That's really nice. So what business backgrounds do they represent?
So, like I said, we've got a number of lawyers. So there's about 50 members of the Lethbridge Bar Association, all with various different areas of practice. We've got accountants, folks that specialize in insolvency. So if people feel like they're up against a debt wall and maybe looking at bankruptcy, that's not the only option. We want people to know that there may be multiple paths. Business owners that have had to perhaps change employment contracts or lay staff off. We've got some folks with HR expertise because that can be hard to navigate, and rules in Alberta recently changed around employment standards. So what you knew a year ago has changed, and so it's important that people be aware of some of those changes. And again, if someone comes in with a problem that we don't have an expert for, we've got a great community in Lethbridge. We'll do our best to find someone who can speak to it. We've also got business advisors available at Tech Connect. So that's the technology incubator here in town. And all of those mostly focused on entrepreneurship and business startups. But all of those advisors are available virtually. And again, that is all free. That is all paid for by the task force to, again, get the business community back up on their feet as fast as possible.
That's great. And then on the flip side, what kind of response have you received from the business community?
Yeah, I mean, the early stages has been good. I think, people are just becoming aware of what hours and what processes. We are having people complete a bit of an intake process because we do want to educate them a little bit on, we need to understand what their business challenges are. Of course, we do want them to take precautions when they come down to the center. They have to know that they need a mask and, those kinds of things. But the initial response has been good. And I think people are just appreciative of having a place to turn to. There's no judgment. It's, again, just advice. People can come, feel comfortable that, no one's going to laugh at them. No one's going to point out the errors of their ways. We're all in this together. This is an unprecedented situation. Again, it's how do we solve problems and how do we move forward?
Awesome. Well, with that, we are out of time. Trevor Lewington, CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge, thanks so much for joining us today.
Appreciate the opportunity to be with you again today.